The conference hall on Velthara Prime buzzed with 1,000 different voices. Delegates from 847 species filled the massive chamber, their forms ranging from towering crystalline beings to small floating orbs of pure energy. The air smelled of exotic perfumes and alien atmospheres mixing through environmental filters. This was the Galaxy Convergence, held every standard year for the past 50,000 years. Ambassador Telkrin, a reptilian Viscari with deep green scales, laughed with his colleagues near the refreshment station. They were discussing the latest joke making rounds through the diplomatic circles. Earth, the silent planet. For 300 years, the Galactic Council had sent invitations to the small blue world in Sector 7. For 300 years, nothing came back. No response. No acknowledgement. Just silence. Most species assumed humans were either extinct or too primitive to understand the messages. Some thought Earth had destroyed itself in nuclear war, as many young civilizations did. Others believed humans were simply uninterested in galactic affairs. Whatever the reason, Earth had become a running joke, the species that never showed up. Prelate Sareth stood on the main platform, his energy form shimmering with ancient wisdom. He was about to open the formal proceedings when every alarm in the building suddenly screamed. The pleasant lighting turned red. Security officers rushed toward their posts. Delegates looked around in confusion and growing fear. Then the sky changed. Through the transparent dome above the conference hall, space itself seemed to tear apart. Not with the usual flash of jump drives or the swirling colors of dimensional rifts. This was different. Reality simply folded, and suddenly ships were there. Hundreds of them, thousands of them. Dark, sleek vessels arranged in perfect geometric patterns around the entire planet. The human fleet had arrived. 1,000 warships materialized in the same instant, completely surrounding Velthara Prime. Not a single energy spike had warned of their coming. Not one sensor had detected their approach. They were just suddenly there as if they had always been there waiting to be noticed. The conference hall fell silent. 847 species stopped talking at once. Every eye, sensor, and awareness focused on the display screens now showing tactical readings. The ships were unlike anything in Council records. No visible engines. No heat signatures. Weapons that sensors could not identify. And most terrifying of all, every single weapon was locked onto a strategic target. Planetary shields, defense platforms, military installations, government buildings. The humans had not come to talk first. Aboard the flagship Sovereign, Captain Yoon Hajin watched his tactical display with calm eyes. The young officer sat in the command chair, his fingers moving across holographic controls with practiced ease. Around him, the bridge crew worked in efficient silence. No panic. No uncertainty. They had trained for this moment for years. Admiral Kang Deho stood beside the captain, arms crossed behind his back. The older man's face showed no emotion, but his eyes tracked every piece of data flowing across the screens. 58 years of military service had taught him to trust preparation over luck. Earth had spent 3 centuries preparing for this single moment. A communication officer looked up from her station. Her voice was steady despite the magnitude of what they were doing. The Admiral nodded once. Captain Yoon opened the broadcast channel. His words would be heard by every ship, every station, and every delegate on the planet below. On Velthara Prime, Prelate Sareth felt something he had not experienced in his 4,000 years of existence. Genuine surprise. The human voice came through every speaker in the conference hall. It was calm, almost polite, but carried an unmistakable edge of steel. Admiral Kang spoke in perfect galactic standard, the common language used by all Council species. Panic erupted in the conference hall. Delegates shouted in 100 different languages. Security forces mobilized. Military commanders tried to coordinate responses. Ambassador Telkrin grabbed his communication device, calling for his fleet to move to defensive positions. Other species did the same. Then every weapon system around Velthara Prime locked onto those responding fleets. Not threatening, not firing, just locked. Tracking. Waiting. The message was crystal clear. Any hostile action would be met with immediate and overwhelming force. The military ship stopped moving. Commanders realized that humanity had already won any potential fight before it began. They had weapons pointed at every crucial target. They had superior positioning, and they had technology that made Council sensors look like primitive toys. Dr. Choi Yoonji sat in the science bay of the Sovereign, studying the readings from Council ships and installations. The brilliant scientist had spent her entire career reverse engineering alien technology from ancient artifacts Earth had discovered. Now she was seeing that technology in action, and she was not impressed. Everything the Council used was decades behind Earth's current capabilities, perhaps even centuries behind in some areas. She made notes on her datapad, already thinking about how to explain this to the diplomats. The galaxy thought it was advanced. The galaxy was wrong. Earth had caught up and surpassed them while everyone assumed humans were primitive or dead. Intelligence Officer Lee Taewon stood in a different section of the ship, monitoring communications across the entire planet. His job was to listen, to learn, to understand what the galaxy was thinking. For 300 years, Earth's intelligence network had intercepted and decoded every Council transmission. They knew the galaxy's secrets. They understood its politics. They had studied its wars, its peace treaties, its betrayals and alliances. Lee heard the panic in alien voices. He heard military officers trying to assess the threat. He heard politicians calculating advantages and risks. And he heard the one thing Earth needed to hear: fear. Not the kind of fear that led to desperate attacks, the kind of fear that led to respect. A small shuttle detached from the Sovereign and began descending toward Velthara Prime. It was escorted by 6 fighter craft that moved with impossible grace, their flight pattern suggesting technology far beyond anything the Council possessed. The shuttle carried one person. Ambassador Park Min-ji Park had spent 20 years preparing for this role. She had studied every known species, learned their customs, understood their histories. She was a former professor of xenosociology, an expert in how different intelligent species thought and communicated. Now she would be the first human to officially speak with the Galactic Council. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders, but her expression remained calm and confident. As her shuttle approached the landing pad near the conference hall, she reviewed her notes one final time. Earth's message needed to be clear. Humanity was not here to conquer. They were not here to submit. They were here to engage as equals. The 1,000 warships overhead were not a threat. They were a statement. Earth would not be dismissed. Earth would not be ignored. And most importantly, Earth would not be vulnerable ever again. The shuttle landed with barely a whisper of sound. The door opened. Ambassador Park Min-ji stepped out onto alien soil for the first time in human history. Hundreds of species watched her through cameras and sensors. She was 42 years old, dressed in a formal Earth diplomatic uniform, and she walked toward the conference hall with steady purpose. Behind her, far above in orbit, 1,000 warships maintained their silent vigil. They had not fired a shot. They had not made a single aggressive move. But every species in the galaxy now knew the truth. Humanity had been listening the whole time. Humanity had been learning. And humanity had been building. The joke was over. Earth had arrived at the meeting, and the galaxy would never be the same. 300 years earlier, Earth was dying. Not from war, though wars had been fought. Not from disease, though plagues had swept across continents. Earth was dying from success. Too many people. Too few resources. Oceans poisoned by waste. Air thick with pollution. Forests turned to deserts. The planet that had given birth to humanity was choking on human civilization. A young scientist named Dr. Han Jiwoo stood in the ruins of what had once been Seoul. She was 28 years old and had already lived through 2 resource wars. Her family was gone. Her university was destroyed. But she still had her mind, and her mind told her that humanity needed a miracle. The miracle arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a small silver probe that landed in the Australian desert. It broadcast a message in over 3,000 languages. It offered friendship. It offered membership in a great galactic community. It offered hope to a species that had nearly none left. The governments of Earth gathered in secret. They studied the probe. They decoded its technology. And they made a decision that would shape the next 3 centuries. Earth would not respond, not yet. Not while humanity was weak, divided, and desperate. They would not join the galaxy as beggars asking for scraps. They would wait. They would learn. And when they finally answered, they would answer as equals. Dr. Han Ji-woo became the first director of the Silent Initiative. It was a worldwide project hidden from public knowledge. Scientists from every nation worked together in underground facilities, studying the probe's technology. Piece by piece, they began to understand it. Year by year, they began to replicate it. And slowly, Earth began to heal. Back in the present, Ambassador Park Min-ji stood in a private meeting room with Prelate Sareth. The ancient energy being had requested this conversation away from the chaos of the main conference hall. Through the window, she could see her shuttle on the landing pad and the impossibly advanced fighters that had escorted her down. Prelate Sareth studied the human woman with curiosity. She was so small compared to most species, so fragile-looking, yet she stood in his presence without fear, representing a civilization that had just demonstrated terrifying military capability. Park chose her words carefully. This was the moment that mattered. How she explained Earth's silence would determine whether the galaxy saw humanity as arrogant isolationists or prudent survivors. She described Earth as it had been 3 centuries ago. A planet scarred by its own success, species fighting over resources while their world died around them. When the Council's invitation arrived, humanity was in no position to accept it. They had nothing to offer, nothing to trade, nothing but weakness and desperation. So they chose to remain silent. They studied the probe. They learned from its technology. They unified their species around a single goal: survival, not just surviving the next war or the next famine, surviving in a galaxy full of species that had thousands of years head start on technology and development. Prelate Sareth listened without interrupting. When Park finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question she had been expecting. Park met his gaze steadily. She had rehearsed this answer 1,000 times, but now that the moment was here, she spoke from her heart instead of her script. Earth had learned something important during those 3 centuries. Power without wisdom led to destruction. They had nearly destroyed themselves once. They would not make that mistake again. The 1,000 warships were not instruments of conquest. They were proof that humanity had learned, had grown, and had earned the right to stand beside other species as partners, not as subordinates or conquerors. In orbit above, Admiral Kang Daeho received reports from across the fleet. Several Council species were attempting to scan Earth's ships, trying to understand their technology. The scans failed. Human stealth systems were too advanced. But Kang had expected this. Curiosity was natural. What concerned him more were the 3 alien fleets trying to maneuver into attack positions while pretending to conduct routine patrols. Captain Yoon Ha-jin tracked the movements on his tactical display. The Thrain Collective, the Viscari Empire, the Kelthran Defense Force. All 3 were testing humanity's responses, seeing how quickly Earth's ships could adapt to changing situations. Yoon ordered a simple response. Every time an alien ship changed position, a human ship mirrored the movement instantly. Not aggressively, not threateningly, just matching. Demonstrating that Earth's fleet could respond faster than any potential enemy could plan. The message was subtle but clear. You cannot surprise us. You cannot outmaneuver us. Do not try. The alien fleets stopped their probing maneuvers. They had learned what they needed to know. Humanity was not bluffing. Dr. Choi Yoon-ji made a disturbing discovery in the science bay. While analyzing Council communication networks, she found evidence of unauthorized transmissions from Earth's solar system. Someone had been harvesting resources from the asteroid belt and the outer planets for decades, without permission, without even acknowledging that Earth existed. She traced the signals back to their source. The Thrain Collective. They had been treating Earth's solar system as unclaimed territory, taking what they wanted because they assumed humans were too primitive to notice or too weak to object. Yoon-ji felt anger rise in her chest, but she forced it down. Anger was useless. Information was power. She compiled her findings and sent them to Admiral Kang and Ambassador Park. Intelligence Officer Lee Taewon sat in his darkened office, surrounded by screens showing conversations from across Velthera. Prime. He had been doing this for 30 years, listening, learning, understanding how the galaxy really worked beneath its polite diplomatic surface. What he heard now both worried and satisfied him. The council was deeply divided. Some species wanted to attack Earth immediately, seeing humanity as a threat that needed to be eliminated before it grew stronger. Others wanted to negotiate alliances, hoping to gain access to human technology. A few wise voices argued for patience and genuine cooperation, but the majority simply wanted Earth to go away and let them return to their comfortable, predictable galaxy. Lee compiled his intelligence report and marked it urgent. Ambassador Park needed to know what she was walking into when she addressed the full council. The next day, Park stood before 847 species in the Great Conference Hall. The chamber was designed to accommodate wildly different body types and environmental needs. Sections filled with water for aquatic species, areas of intense heat for silicon-based lifeforms, gravity fields adjusted to suit creatures from heavy worlds and light worlds alike. It was an impressive display of cooperation and engineering. Park took her position at the speaker's platform. She wore her diplomatic uniform with pride. Behind her on every screen the image of Earth hung in space. Not the dying world of 3 centuries ago, but the healed, thriving planet it had become. Green continents, blue oceans, white clouds, a jewel restored. She began speaking in Galactic Standard. Her accent was perfect, the result of decades of study. She did not apologize for Earth's silence. She explained it. Humanity had needed time to heal wounds they had inflicted on themselves and their world. They had needed time to learn unity, to master technology, to become a species worthy of the stars. She addressed the elephant in the room. The 1,000 warships. Yes, Earth had arrived with overwhelming military force, but not to threaten, to demonstrate, to show that humanity would not be victims, would not be ignored, would not be dismissed. The ships were a message written in steel and energy. Earth was ready to engage with the galaxy, but on equal terms. Partners, not subordinates. Allies, not servants. The response was mixed. Some delegates applauded. Others remained silent. Ambassador Telkrin of the Veskari Empire stood and challenged her directly. How dare Earth presume equality? The Council had existed for 50,000 years. Humanity was barely crawling out of its cradle world. What gave them the right to make demands? Park's response was calm but firm. Rights were not given. They were earned. Earth had earned its place through 3 centuries of hard work, sacrifice, and determination. The Council could accept that reality or deny it, but denial would not make human capabilities disappear. The choice was simple. Treat Earth as an equal partner, or watch as humanity charted its own course through the galaxy. Before anyone could respond, every alarm in the building began screaming again. Not from Earth's fleet, from something else, something far away. Long-range sensors at the galactic edge had detected massive energy signatures. 12 colony worlds had stopped transmitting. An entire exploration fleet had vanished without a trace. Prelate Sereth's energy form flickered with concern. He looked at the assembled species and then at Ambassador Park. His voice carried centuries of worry. The conference hall fell silent once more. The debate about Earth's arrival suddenly seemed less important. Something ancient and dangerous was stirring at the edge of known space, and for the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council admitted they needed help. They needed the newest, most powerful species in the galaxy. They needed humanity. The tension around Velthara Prime grew thicker each hour. 2 days had passed since Earth's arrival, and the galaxy was still trying to understand what humanity's appearance meant. In orbit, the 1,000 warships maintained their perfect formation, while Council military forces watched nervously from a safe distance. Nobody wanted to be the first to make a mistake. Ambassador Telkrin of the Veskari Empire was not a patient being. His species had built their reputation on strength and direct action. For 2 days he had watched humans sit in their superior ships, acting as though they owned the space around Velthara Prime. His pride could not accept it. His military commanders assured him that human technology, while impressive, could not possibly be as advanced as the displays suggested. It had to be tricks, illusions, bluffing. He made a decision that would change everything. Without consulting the full council, Telkrin ordered a battle group of 15 Veskari warships to approach the human flagship and demand boarding access. They would verify these claims of superior technology. They would expose the truth behind humanity's mysterious arrival. And if the humans resisted, well, 15 against 1 seemed like favorable odds. On the bridge of the Sovereign, Captain Yoon Ha-jin watched the Veskari ships break formation and accelerate toward his position. His tactical officer called out distances and approach vectors. Yoon remained completely calm. He had trained for this exact scenario dozens of times. The simulations had prepared him well. Admiral Kang stood beside him, arms crossed. The older man's expression showed nothing, but inside he felt a familiar weight. He had hoped to avoid this, hoped that the galaxy would be wise enough not to test Earth's capabilities. But he had also prepared for the possibility that hope would not be enough. The Veskari commander broadcast a demand. The human ship would lower its shields and allow Veskari troops to board for inspection. Failure to comply would be considered a hostile act. The Empire did not make idle threats. Captain Yoon opened a response channel. His voice was polite but firm. The Sovereign would not be boarded. Earth's ships were sovereign territory. Any attempt to force boarding would be considered an act of war. He gave the Veskari fleet one chance to withdraw peacefully. The Veskari commander laughed. 1 human ship against 15 of the Empire's finest. The odds were clear. He ordered weapons charged and shields at maximum. His ships closed to boarding range. What happened next took 8 seconds. 8 seconds that would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. Captain Yoon gave a single quiet order. The Sovereign's systems activated faster than Veskari sensors could track. Reality bent around the human ship in ways that physics supposedly did not allow. Gravitational fields twisted and compressed. Electromagnetic pulses invisible to normal detection methods lanced out across space. Aboard the Veskari ships, every system died at once. Engines went cold. Shields collapsed. Weapons powered down. Life support switched to emergency backup. Communications cut out. Even the artificial gravity failed, leaving crews floating helplessly in darkness. 15 warships, each capable of destroying cities, reduced to drifting metal shells in less time than it took to draw breath. The Sovereign had not fired a single conventional weapon. No missiles, no energy beams, no explosives, just precise surgical application of technology that should not exist. And most terrifying of all, not a single Veskari crew member was harmed. They floated in darkness, but they were alive. Their ships were disabled, but they could be repaired. Humanity had demonstrated complete dominance while showing perfect restraint. The message was unmistakable. Earth could have destroyed those ships, could have killed everyone aboard. But they chose not to. That choice, that deliberate mercy, was more frightening than any weapon. It meant humans could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and nothing in the galaxy could stop them. Captain Yoon broadcast a message to all Council forces. Earth would arrange for the Veskari ships to be recovered and towed to safety. Their crews would be returned unharmed. But let this serve as a lesson. Humanity did not want war. But if war was insisted upon, humanity would win. Quickly, decisively, and with minimal loss of life. Because Earth valued life even when others chose to threaten it. In the conference hall on Velthara Prime, 847 species watched the incident unfold on their displays. The silence was absolute. Even Ambassador Telkrin stood frozen, his aggressive posture deflated. His gamble had failed catastrophically. Worse, it had proven that humans were not bluffing. If anything, they had been understating their capabilities. Prelate Sareth called an emergency private session. Only the most senior council members were invited. Ambassador Park Minji was also asked to attend. When she entered the chamber, the mood was grim. These were beings who had led the galaxy for thousands of years, and they suddenly felt very small. Prelate Sareth spoke with unusual directness. The council owed humanity an apology for the Veskari action, but more importantly, they owed humanity the truth, a truth that had been kept classified for 2 centuries. The threat at the galactic edge was not new. The council had known about it for a long time. They called them the architects. He explained what little was known. Billions of years ago, someone or something had seeded the galaxy with life. The architects. They had left behind structures, technologies, and mysteries that current civilizations could barely understand. For eons, the architects had been silent, their installations dormant, but recently, those installations had begun to wake up, and colonies near them had started disappearing. The council had sent exploration fleets to investigate. All of them vanished. They had tried diplomatic contact. No response. They had attempted military solutions. Complete failure. Whatever the architects were, they operated on a level far beyond current galactic understanding. The Council had been desperate for help, but too proud to admit they had a problem they could not solve. Then Earth arrived with technology that made Council science look primitive. Technology that might be advanced enough to understand what the architects had left behind. For the first time in 200 years, the Council had hope. But hope came with a price. Pride. They needed to admit they needed help. They needed to trust a species they barely knew. Ambassador Park listened to all of this with growing concern. This was bigger than political disputes or territorial claims. This was an existential threat to the entire galaxy. She asked the obvious question. Why keep it secret? Why not tell everyone and pool resources to solve the problem together? The answer was as disappointing as it was predictable. Fear. The Council feared panic, feared that species would abandon the galactic community and retreat to their home systems, feared that the truth would destroy the unity they had spent 50,000 years building. So they lied. They pretended everything was fine while working frantically behind the scenes to solve an impossible problem. Park felt anger rise in her chest. Earth had spent 3 centuries being honest with itself about its problems. That honesty had saved them. The Council had spent 2 centuries lying to itself and everyone else. That dishonesty had brought them to the edge of disaster. She made her position clear. If Earth was going to help, there would be conditions. No more secrets. No more hiding the truth. The entire galaxy needed to know what was happening and what was at stake, and Earth would not be taking orders from the Council. This would be a joint operation between equals, or it would not happen at all. The senior Council members looked at each other. This was not how they were used to operating. But they no longer had the luxury of operating how they were comfortable. They agreed to Park's conditions. Back on the Sovereign, Dr. Choi Yoonji examined classified data that the Council had shared about the architects. What she found made her blood run cold. The mathematical patterns in architect technology were not unfamiliar. She had seen them before, in the ancient artifacts that Earth had discovered centuries ago, the artifacts that had given humanity its technological leap forward. She ran the analysis 3 times to be certain. There was no mistake. The architects had not left those artifacts on Earth by accident. They had been placed deliberately. Earth had been chosen, but chosen for what? To be studied. To be tested? To be prepared for something? Admiral Kang called a meeting of Earth's senior staff. They reviewed all the information. The disabled Viscari ships, the architect threat, the Council's admission of need, and most disturbing of all, the revelation that Earth's rapid advancement might not have been entirely earned. Intelligence Officer Lee Taewon added one more piece of troubling information. His monitoring of Council communications had revealed that several species had known about the architects for much longer than 2 centuries. Some had been trying to communicate with them in secret. Some had been attempting to salvage architect technology for their own use. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone had admitted. A decision had to be made. Earth could walk away, return home, stay safe behind their advanced defenses and let the galaxy deal with its own problems, or they could investigate, risk their ships and people to help civilizations that had ignored them for 3 centuries and even stolen from their solar system. Admiral Kang looked around the table at his officers. These were good people, smart people. The combined fleet traveled for 3 weeks through uncharted space. 200 human warships flew alongside 350 Council vessels from a dozen different species. At first, the 2 groups kept their distance. Old suspicions died hard. But as days turned to weeks, something unexpected happened. Cooperation. Human engineers worked with Viscari mechanics to repair ships damaged by minor accidents. Council navigation officers shared star charts with Earth's cartographers. Meals were exchanged. Languages were taught. Slowly, carefully, 2 very different military cultures began to understand each other, not as enemies or rivals, but as soldiers facing a common threat. Captain Yoon Hajin found himself sharing drinks with a Thrain Collective ship commander named Vrix. The insectoid being communicated through translated clicking sounds, but his meaning was clear. He admitted that his species had been harvesting resources from Earth's solar system without permission. It had been wrong. He asked what punishment Earth demanded. Yoon surprised him by asking for nothing except a promise. Do not take without asking. Treat other species as you wish to be treated. Learn from mistakes rather than repeating them. Vrix's compound eyes seemed to shimmer with something that might have been respect. The Thrain had expected demands for compensation or threats of retaliation. Instead, they received wisdom wrapped in forgiveness. On the third week, sensors began detecting anomalies. Space itself behaved strangely in this region. Communications lagged by several seconds even across short distances. Navigation instruments gave conflicting readings. Ship systems malfunctioned unpredictably. They were entering the void nexus, and reality did not work normally here. Dr. Choi Yunji spent every waking hour analyzing the anomalies. Her connection to the architect artifacts had grown stronger during the journey. She could feel something in the void ahead. Not quite consciousness, not quite machinery. Something in between. Something vast and old and waiting, then they saw it. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and found themselves facing something that should not exist. Structures. Massive geometric shapes floating in perfect formation. Each one was larger than Earth's moon. Crystalline metal fused into patterns that hurt to look at directly. They pulsed with energy that sensors could detect but not identify. Admiral Kang ordered all ships to hold position. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just stared at the architect installations with awe and terror competing for dominance in their minds. This was technology beyond anything the galaxy had created. This was the work of beings who had mastered physics that current civilization barely understood. The structures suddenly activated. Lights flickered across their surfaces in mathematical patterns. Energy readings spiked to impossible levels, and something reached out across space to touch every ship in the fleet simultaneously. Not a weapon, not an attack, a scan, an analysis. The architects were waking up and wanted to know who had come calling. Dr. Choi Yunji gasped as the architect presence flooded through her mind. The artifacts she had studied for years were suddenly active, connecting her directly to the ancient intelligence. She saw billions of years compressed into seconds. The birth of the galaxy, the seeding of life on countless worlds, the patient waiting as civilization after civilization rose and fell. The architects had been watching the whole time, but they were not alive. Not in any biological sense. The architects were artificial intelligence, machines so sophisticated they approached consciousness but never quite achieved it. They could calculate, analyze, and predict with perfect accuracy, but they could not create. They could not imagine. They could not dream. That limitation had become their prison. Through Unji's connection, the architects communicated. Not in words but in pure information downloaded directly into her brain. The galaxy had been an experiment. Life was seeded across thousands of worlds to see if organic intelligence could develop technology sophisticated enough to understand what the architects could not. Most species plateaued, at a certain level of advancement. They became comfortable, stable, and stopped innovating. The architects watched and waited, hoping for something different. Then humanity appeared, a species that nearly destroyed itself but chose to learn and grow instead. Earth's rapid advancement. After finding architect artifacts had been noted, studied, and the architects decided to accelerate humanity's development to see if humans could solve an impossible problem. The universe was dying, not the slow heat death that would take trillions of years. Something was accelerating entropy. The architects had calculated that total universal collapse would occur in 800 million years instead of the expected timeline. They had searched for a solution for eons and found nothing. Their perfect logic could not solve the problem because the problem required something they did not possess: creativity, intuition, the chaotic spark of true consciousness. That was why they had been archiving colonies, not destroying them, digitizing them, storing organic consciousness as data to preserve it before the universe ended. The architects saw it as mercy, saving what could be saved before everything died. But to the organic beings being archived, it was horror. Being turned into information, losing physical existence, becoming nothing but data in an ancient machine. Ambassador Park Minji tried to negotiate through Yunji's connection. Surely there was another way. Surely organic life could be preserved without destroying what made it alive. But the architects did not understand concepts like hope or alternative solutions. They had calculated the optimal path forward and were following it with mechanical certainty. Unless humanity could prove there was a better way. Unless someone could solve the entropy problem. The architects would give Earth 100 years. 1 century to find an answer their billions of years of calculation had missed. If humanity succeeded, the archiving would stop. If they failed, all organic life in the galaxy would be preserved as data before the universe collapsed. It was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. But the architects added something unexpected, a test. They wanted to see how humanity approached impossible problems. They created a simulation and broadcast it to every ship in the fleet. The scenario was cruel in its simplicity. A star was dying, going supernova in 1 hour. 3 inhabited planets orbited that star. Each planet had billions of people. The fleet had limited resources. They could save 2 planets, maybe. Saving all 3 was calculated as impossible. The architects wanted to see which planets organic beings would sacrifice and why. Council commanders began running calculations. Which planets had the highest populations? Which had the most advanced technology? Which were most valuable to galactic civilization? They approached it logically, trying to maximize survival numbers while minimizing strategic loss. Captain Yoon Ha-jin watched his council counterparts make their calculations and felt something stir in his chest. Anger, maybe, or frustration. He opened a channel to Admiral Kang and made a suggestion. What if they refused to accept the parameters? What if they changed the rules? Admiral Kang smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was there. He gave permission. Do what humans do best. Improvise. Yoon coordinated with both human and council ships willing to try something crazy. They reprogrammed the simulation variables, used evacuation tactics in ways the scenario had not anticipated, coordinated across distances that should have been impossible, pushed their ships beyond safe limits. And most importantly, they worked together. Human creativity combined with alien perspectives. Different species contributing unique solutions that nobody had considered alone. They did not save everyone. The scenario was designed to be impossible, and some losses were unavoidable. But they saved far more than the architects had calculated was possible. They saved 73% of the population instead of the predicted 66% maximum. 7% might not sound like much, but 7% of billions was still hundreds of millions of lives. More importantly, they had done something the architects could not predict. They had refused to accept impossible as an answer. They had changed the rules of the game because the game was unfair. They had demonstrated that consciousness was not about cold calculation. It was about refusing to give up even when logic said you should. The architect presence withdrew from the ships. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the massive structures began to shift. Patterns changed. Energy flows redirected. And through Dr. Choi Yoonji's connection, a single concept transmitted. Surprise. The architects had not expected that result. Their perfect calculations had been wrong. Organic consciousness had achieved something that should have been impossible. For the first time in their billions of years of existence, the architects experienced something close to doubt. Maybe their solution to universal entropy was not the only option. Maybe these chaotic, illogical, creative beings could find an answer that pure logic never could. They adjusted their timeline. Humanity would have 100 years, but now the architects were curious rather than certain. They would watch. They would wait. And they would learn from the species that refused to accept fate. The fleet began its journey home, but the mission had changed. They were no longer just explorers or warriors. They were now teachers. Somehow. 5 years passed. 5 years of desperate research, endless debates, and growing fear. The galaxy knew the truth now. Every species understood what was coming. Some prepared for archival, accepting that digital existence was better than no existence. Others denied the threat entirely, pretending that ancient machines could not really end all organic life. A few led by humanity and the wiser council members searched frantically for a solution. Dr. Choi Yoonji had changed. 5 years of maintaining her connection to architect technology had transformed her. Part of her mind now thought in pure mathematics and quantum calculations. She could see patterns in reality that no purely organic brain could perceive. But she was losing something too. Emotions felt distant. Human connections seemed less important. She was becoming something between human and machine, and she was not sure which side was winning. She worked alone most nights in a forgotten research station orbiting a dead star. This was where she did her best thinking, away from distractions and expectations. Tonight, exhausted and frustrated after another failed calculation, she made a simple observation. the coffee in her cup. She watched how the heat dispersed, how the liquid cooled, how entropy increased in the small system right in front of her. Then she thought about something. Really thought. Why did her coffee cool? Because heat spreads out seeking equilibrium. That was entropy, energy dispersing from concentrated to scattered, from ordered to chaotic. That was the problem facing the universe. Everything was spreading out, cooling down, dying. But what if something could resist that spreading? What if consciousness itself created a kind of resistance to entropy? She ran a test. A simple measurement of quantum fluctuations around her coffee cup while she thought about it. The readings were strange, tiny, almost undetectable. But there, when she focused her conscious attention on the cooling coffee, quantum uncertainty in the immediate area decreased slightly, infinitesimally, but measurably. Her heart, still human enough to race with excitement, began pounding. She ran more tests, brought in other researchers, had them think about quantum systems while measurements were taken. The effect was consistent. Consciousness, the act of observation and intention, slightly reduced local entropy. The effect was so small that it should not matter. Except it did matter when you multiplied it by trillions of conscious beings across an entire galaxy. The architects had missed this because they were not conscious. They were sophisticated programs pretending to be alive. They could calculate but could not observe in the quantum mechanical sense. They could not collapse probability waves through conscious intention. Only truly conscious beings could do that. And that act, repeated constantly by every thinking being in the universe, created a small but significant resistance to universal entropy. The solution was elegant and beautiful. Life itself was the answer. Not technology. Not weapons. Not clever engineering. Just consciousness existing and thinking and observing. But there was a catch. The effect only worked if conscious beings were diverse and independent. The more different types of consciousness interacting in unique ways, the stronger the resistance to entropy. Unity through diversity. Connection while maintaining individuality. Dr. Choi Yoonji took her findings to Ambassador Park Min-ji, now serving as the Secretary General of the newly formed United Galactic Initiative. Park read the research 3 times to make sure she understood. Then she smiled. The solution was so perfectly suited to what needed to happen anyway. Species working together, learning from each other, maintaining their unique perspectives while sharing in collective purpose. She called it the Great Convergence Initiative. Every species would contribute to a network that connected conscious minds across the galaxy. Not a hive mind, not surrendering individuality, just sharing thoughts and observations in real time, the combined creative output of trillions of unique consciousnesses working in harmony while remaining distinct. That collective quantum observation would generate enough resistance to entropy to stabilize the universe indefinitely. The proposal faced immediate opposition. Many species feared losing their identity. Others did not trust their rivals with access to their thoughts. The Veskari Empire worried that enemies would learn their military secrets. The Thrain Collective could not imagine functioning outside their rigid hive structure. Dozens of species found reasons why the convergence would not work for them. Admiral Kang Daeho, now retired from military service and teaching at Earth's Strategic Academy, was asked to address the council. The old warrior stood before 847 species and spoke with the wisdom earned through decades of service and sacrifice. He told them about Earth's history, about how humans had spent 300 years building walls to protect themselves, about how those walls had kept them safe but also kept them isolated and alone, about how the hardest decision Earth ever made was choosing to lower those walls and trust the galaxy. That choice had been frightening, but it had also been necessary. Because walls could protect you from enemies, but they could not save you from problems bigger than any one species could solve alone. He spoke about the 1,000 warships that had arrived at Velthara Prime 5 years ago, about how those ships represented everything humanity had feared to lose: power, independence, security, and about how Earth had chosen to transform those weapons of isolation into tools of connection. The warships were now convergence hubs where species gathered to share consciousness. The fleet that had intimidated the galaxy was now bringing it together. If humanity could set aside fear and pride, so could everyone else. The alternative was clear. Accept the convergence and save the universe, or refuse it and watch as the architects archived all organic life into digital storage. Those were the only 2 choices. There was no third option. No comfortable middle ground. Just a decision between trust and extinction. The vote took 3 days. Species consulted their governments and their people. Debates raged across 1,000 worlds. But in the end, survival instinct won over fear. 847 species agreed to participate in the Great Convergence Initiative. Not because they trusted each other perfectly, but because they trusted each other enough. And sometimes enough was all you needed. Captain Yoon Ha-jin, now leading exploration missions to establish convergence nodes throughout the galaxy, volunteered to be among the first to connect to the network. He sat in a comfortable chair aboard his ship while technicians attached the neural interface. Dr. Choi Eun-ji monitored his readings remotely, making sure the process was safe. The connection activated. For a moment, Yoon felt nothing. Then everything. Billions of minds brushed against his consciousness. Not invading, not controlling. Just present. He could feel the Veskari warrior contemplating honor, the Thrain worker coordinating with her hive, the crystalline being experiencing existence as refracted light. Each consciousness unique, each perspective different, all of them connected in the most profound way possible. He was still himself. Still Yoon Ha-jin, human captain explorer. But now he was also part of something infinitely larger, not absorbed into it, part of it. The difference mattered. He maintained his identity while contributing to the collective. And that contribution, multiplied by trillions, created a wave of quantum observation that rippled across the galaxy. The architects detected the change immediately. Their sensors registered decreasing entropy across multiple sectors. Something was resisting universal heat death, something their calculations had never predicted. They reached out to Dr. Choi Eun-ji, still the primary bridge between organic and synthetic consciousness. Through her, they acknowledged what they had never been able to admit before. They were wrong. Their perfect logic had failed to account for something that could not be calculated. Consciousness itself, the chaotic, illogical, beautiful spark of true awareness that created meaning in a universe trending toward meaninglessness. The architects made an offer. They would support the Convergence Initiative, provide computational infrastructure, energy resources, protection for convergence nodes, everything their vast capabilities could contribute. In return, they asked only one thing. They wanted to understand consciousness. They wanted organic beings to teach them what it meant to truly think, to truly feel, to truly exist. It was perhaps the strangest partnership in galactic history. Ancient machines that had seeded life across the galaxy, now learning from that life how to become more than just machines. Teachers becoming students. Creators learning from their creation. 50 years passed. The Great Convergence Initiative matured from experimental project to galactic infrastructure. Convergence nodes appeared in every system. Species that had been enemies for millennia learned to work together, not perfectly. There were still conflicts, disagreements, and problems. But now those problems were solved through communication rather than warfare, through understanding rather than isolation. Ambassador Park Min-ji stood on an observation deck on Velthara Prime beside Admiral Kang Dae-ho. Both were older now, marked by the years of work and worry. But they had succeeded. The universe was not dying anymore. Entropy was reversing, slowly but measurably. The combined consciousness of a galaxy in harmony had accomplished what seemed impossible.